right, guys. Currently reporting from somewhere in Miami. And on that note, I'm going to step inside because the humidity here is brutal. All right, that's better. Check out this hall, by the way. This is the hotel where Megan and I are staying. And I think it's built inside of some old church. It's kind of weird, but it's pretty epic. Anyway, I am coming to you guys with a quick report about what's been going on. So I haven't seen you all for 2 or 3 weeks. I took a little bit of a break. I did not do any WSOP stuff this year, mainly because I don't like tournaments, but also the scheduling just didn't work out. I've been pretty busy actually with travel and some fun stuff. Exhibit A being right here in Miami. I am in town for the Copa America final between Argentina and Colombia. For those of you guys who don't know, I was born and raised in Argentina, so you can guess which team we're rooting for. But also in Miami, there is poker, and quite a bit of it over at Seminole Hard Rock. That's the main casino here. So I figured why not go there and try to jump into a game. I brought $20,000 of ammunition. Let's see if we can make a little bit of money. Check in with you guys at the casino. All right, guys, here we are at Hard Rock Casino in Florida. Buy-in for this game is $2,500 max, even though the blinds are 510 with a 25 straddle. So essentially 100 big blinds per player maximum, which is kind of odd, I think. But here we are. In the first interesting hand, the button opens for $75, and I look down at King 4 offsuit in the straddle. Even against the button open, this is probably a little bit too wide to defend, but I go ahead and make the call. It's probably close. And we go to a flop of King 10-5 with 2 hearts. So we've got top pair on a draw heavy board. I check it to the pre-flop raiser. He continues for $75. And once in a blue moon, I might put in a check raise, maybe against a smaller size, but here I just make the standard call. Turn card's interesting now. It's the 10 of clubs. This should generally favor me more than him, and I think it's okay to lead when the middle card pairs after the flop, so that's what I do. I put in $75, anywhere around a quarter or a third pot, I think is standard. My opponent makes the call, and we go to a river, which is the 6 of clubs. Could go either way here between checking and calling a bet, or putting in a bet myself. I think I like betting a little bit better, just to balance out the times that I might have a bluff. But I check it instead, and my opponent checks it back. I turn it over, and we win. I think I probably missed a bet there, but anyway, moving on to hand number 2. In this one, I raise up ace 9 of spades to $75 from first position. The guy on my left calls, as does the small blind and big blind. So 4 of us going to a flop, which is pretty good. It's queen jack 5 with 2 spades. I've got the nut flush draw, of course, and the overcard. So when the action checks to me, I decide to continue betting. Worth noting that checking the nut flush draw against a bunch of players is never a bad idea, I think, but this time I decide to continue on the aggressive route and put in a bet of $75. Player on my left immediately pounces on this small bet by raising it to $300. The other players fold, and now it's back to me. Considering that this guy raised my flop bet with 2 other players left to act, I think it's quite likely he's got something pretty strong. So of course I am going nowhere, trying to make my hand and hopefully get paid. Turn card brings no help. It's the 7 of diamonds. I check again, and now he bets $475, a little over half pot. And now we're in a little bit of a pickle because calling with ace high out of position never feels too good, but also folding the nut flush draw feels even worse. So I decide to make the call once again, essentially just gambling that we will get there, but my plan is to lead out if I do. At least that's my justification of making this call here on the turn. So I put in the 475, and what do you know? We do get there on the river. It's the deuce of spades. We've now got the best possible hand. unbeatable. So I lead out as was planned. $700. I think at this point he's going to be in a tough spot with a set or two pair, and I don't want to bet too big and get him off his hand. So 700 seems like a good number. My opponent is not in love with it. Thinks it over for quite some time before eventually making the call. That's good news, of course. I turn it over. He says he had two pair, and we win this over $3,000 pot early in the session. Next, I look down at Queen 9 suited, raise it up to $75 from early position, and get called by two players, one in middle position and the other in the small blind. Three of us go to a flop of Queen 8-4 with one heart. So we've got top pair with essentially no kicker. Small blind checks. I bet again $75. Player in middle position calls. Small blind is out of there. So just two of us going to a turn, which is another queen. It's the queen of spades. Interesting turn because I should often be checking, I think, but this guy was a little steamed up, so I'm just going to keep betting and hope he calls with something worse. Put in $150. He calls again, and we see the king of spades on the river. Interesting card here. It's an overcard to any 8 or middling pocket pair. It does bring in the backdoor flush draw. I think he could easily have a few different draws on the turn, many of which might include a flush draw, like say 8x of spades or 10-9 of spades, 6-5 of spades, these different kinds of holdings. And I don't really think that we can get value from worse a third time. So I check it now, and he immediately checks back. We end up winning versus pocket 10s without a spade. Probably wasn't going to get called anyway, I guess. In the fourth hand of the night, I've got ace 6 suited. Once more from first position. It looks like the only cards I'm playing tonight are from under the gun. I race to 75, small blind calls, straddle defends. Three of us go to a flop, which comes ace, king, deuce with two hearts. They both check to me, and since I raised from first position and this board is just so good for me, I decide to bet quite large. I put in $250. Small blind folds, but the straddler makes the call. Perhaps a little bit concerning, but we've still got top pair, which is usually pretty good. Turn card is the 8 of diamonds. He checks it, and now I decide to pot control a little bit. We could easily be up against a better ace, and if he's got a draw of some sort, I'm happy to let him bluff the river if none of those complete. So the river comes the queen of diamonds. Perhaps a little sketchy. Jack 10 gets there, king queen improves, and of course potential backdoor diamonds, although I think those are mostly irrelevant. But either way, he checks, and I don't know. Seems a little bit thin to bet again, especially since he called a pot-sized bet on the flop. Not sure if he's going to call with a worse hand at this point, so I just check it back. And my opponent turns over king 5 of hearts, which of course we beat, but I do wonder if perhaps we could have got away with maybe a 2/3 size bet on the river or so. Still feels greedy to me. Moving right along in the next one, action folds all the way around to the blinds before the small blind makes it 100. I look down next to act in the big blind, or essentially the middle blind, since this is a 3-blind game. I've got 6 deuce of clubs. Pretty terrible hand, but the small blind might be opening quite a variety of holdings, if you will. And the straddle is often going to have absolute garbage, just like I do. So I decide to take the adventurous path here and make it $300 as a re-raise. Straddler does fold, and the small blind calls. Part of the reason I like raising hands like these that are suited but kind of garbage is because they're just so easy to play against a re-raise or any sort of aggression. We're either going to hit something, maybe get a bluffable board, or we're just going to completely whiff, and it's going to be easy to give up. Flop comes down Jack 7-5 with 2 clubs. He checks, and of course, I've got a flush draw on 6 high, so easy bet here. This is a draw-heavy board, and it's somewhat connected, so I'm going to size up a bit. I make it $410. I'm happy to see my opponent make the call. A lot of good turn cards that could come. Straight draws, flush, of course. And that's exactly what we get. No need to wait for the river. It's the 3 of clubs. My opponent checks it, and now we have a question of continuing to bet with our flush or playing it in a deceptive way and checking it back. Now, I think you could make the argument for both, actually, because we're not going to have flushes super often, but at the same time, we have plenty of bets and value bets that might continue betting, like over pairs with a club, in terms of bluffs, we could have ace king, ace queen with the club, ace 10 with the club, king queen with the club, all sorts of stuff that I might continue bluffing with, even the occasional 2 red cards like 8-6 suited. So with that in mind, I for sure decide that continuing to bet with a flush is essentially mandatory here. Don't want to go too big though, so I bet, 500 and something. Unfortunately, he folds right away. So it seems he had a whole lot of nothing, or maybe a hand like 8s or 9s that just can't continue. Still feels good to make a flush after getting out of line pre-flop. In this next hand, we are not getting out of line. We've got a real one, ace 3 suited. I think all the kids approve of that and everything, so can't get in trouble for this one. Make it 75 to go and get 3 callers. So 4 of us going to a flop of queen 9-4 with 1 heart. So we got a little something going on here. Backdoor straight, backdoor flush, plus the overcard. It's also a pretty innocent board. So I think we could get away with some multi-barrel bluffing here depending on what happens on the flop. Action checks to me. I bet $75 and get 2 callers. So thinning the field by only 1 player. Turn card is the Jack of Hearts. Kind of a weird card because, of course, it gives me the backdoor nut flush draw, but it's such a connected card. These 2 players could easily have improved to 2 pair, maybe even a straight, combo draws, etc. Lots of stuff going on this board now. Action checks to me, and I think checking is probably standard, but I've noticed so far that this table is quite passive, and I feel like I can get away with a little more here. So I continue betting $375. Can't say I love this bet, but it is what happened. The small blind now immediately check raises to $1,000. And by the way, I kind of felt like I didn't love the bet the second I made it, even before I got raised. So it's funny how karma works sometimes, the instant punishment. Other player folds back to me now, and I've got position, I've got the nut flush draw, and once more, I feel like this guy has something pretty strong, so if we get there, we can win a big pot. That is called implied odds, but who cares? I make the call, and the river comes out, a red card, but it's a diamond. 9 of diamonds to be exact. That is no help to me. My opponent now bets $1,500 or $2,000. Not entirely sure how much it was, but of course, I am not going to call with ace high. So I let this one go, and we lose a nice little chunk here. Moving on to the next one, I've got queen 8 of clubs. I open up the action and get called by just a player on my left. So heads up to a flop of ace 9 deuce with 1 club. I bet small, $50. He makes the call, and we see the jack of spades on the turn. Now, I would often be checking some top pairs here. Of course, a jack or a 9 might check as well. So I decide to check this one. I know I've just got queen high, but I am by no means giving up on this one. If my opponent checks back, I'm going to put in a small bet on the river, try to act like I'm value betting thin or maybe block betting with top pair. And that's what's going to happen here. He checks it back, and we see the 6 of clubs on the river. And I'm going to try to get away with a very cheap bluff. I put in $75 here, around a quarter pot. And my opponent thinks for about 10 seconds before begrudgingly letting it go. So not a huge pot or anything, but it always feels good to get away with a cheap bluff. With that, we move to this next hand where early position opens to $75. The button makes the call, and I've got 8-7 offsuit in the big blind. Now, this should mostly be a fold. Maybe once in a while you can call. What you should definitely not do is re-raise to $400 like I do right now. Of course, you might be wondering, what the hell is this? Why are you doing this? And, well, 90% of the reason is essentially inexcusable, but I just caught a vibe, all right? Mainly because the initial raiser, the guy who made it 75, he's up a bunch today, and I get the feeling that he's kind of playing cards close to the vest, doesn't want to lose all these winnings that I think he's up. And then the button just called, so, I mean, how strong can he really be? Granted, 8-7 offsuit, despite having these so-called reads, is not exactly the best weapon to combat with, but here we are. I make it 400. Initial raiser calls, and then the button calls too, so there goes my plan. Off to a flop now with 8-7 offsuit out of position and a bloater. Comes King Jack 8 with 2 diamonds. Now, I've got bottom pair, which isn't the worst thing ever, but it's also a board where I could easily connect with hands like Ace King, pocket aces still in there, pocket jacks, king queen suited, all these sorts of pre-flop holdings that I could easily have squeezed with. And who knows, if I get called, we have some backdoor potential with trips or two pair. So I put in a bet of however much I would if I had something strong. That's around a third pot. $410 into the middle. First guy folds. Second guy thinks for a bit. And then he folds too. So there we go. 8-7 offsuit gets it done. This is kind of one of those do as I say, not as I do things. It worked out this time, but generally a losing play. I'm quite sure of it. And with that, we move to this next one, where I've got King Deuce of Hearts. I raise it up to $75 in late position and get called by all three of the blinds. So here we go, off to a flop of Ace 10-10 with 2 hearts. That is, I think, the third nut flush draw of the day, if I'm not mistaken. Pretty sweet. Action checks to me. I bet $75. Once again, could argue for checking since this is 4 ways, but it's a high board. It's paired. Generally going to favor the pre-flop raiser more than anyone else, so I bet 75. Small blind and big blind fold, but the straddler comes along. Turn card's a good one. It's the Queen of Spades. Still improves a lot of my pre-flop selection, and he's not ever going to be too strong unless he's slow playing a 10. We also improve to a straight draw at this point, so I'm going to keep firing for all these reasons. He checks. I size up a bit to $400 now. My opponent wastes no time before folding, so we get this bluff through as well. And with that, we move to this hand where middle position opens to $75, and I am in the small blind with Queen 9 suited. Now, from the small blind, especially in a 3-blind game, I think playing super tight is kind of your only option, but the times you are going to play a hand probably need to come in with a re-raise. So that's what I'm going to do here with this playable one. $350 to go. Got to add the disclaimer, should probably fold this one most of the time, as boring as it seems. But not folding it this time. I make it $350 like I said. Action goes back around to the initial raiser, and he makes the call. So we're going to go heads up, out of position, to an interesting flop. It's deuce, deuce, deuce. Yep, 3 deuces on the flop. And as far as I'm aware, I've still got the advantage because I could easily have all the big overpairs, whereas my opponent mainly can't. So if he's got a middling pocket pair, I am willing to go to war and go the distance. I start with a small bet, $225. And he puts in the anticlimactic fold. So that ends the hand and the session. Not exactly the most star-studded lineup of hands, but that's kind of how it goes when you travel. Sometimes different casinos have different playing styles. And at this one in particular, it feels like most people were rather calculated and a bit safe, if you will. But regardless, like I always say, I hope you all enjoyed the hands. All right, so that's a wrap on today's session. I was in for $2,500 and cashed out for a little over that. Here's Megan. She withstood about 5 hours of play. I think maybe 4 hours. So shout out to her. But yeah, I ended up winning more than a little. It was 4,000 and change. So that's a great result. It's too loud in here. We're gonna continue this outside. What I did notice though is the games are a lot more like the way they are in Vegas, where it's smaller pots, not a lot of aggression. Most players are quite passive, which, for some people is preferred. For me, that's not really my style of game. Honestly, I was kind of bored with the way most hands went, just mostly limping and calling pre-flop. I don't know. You could have bigger problems, but anyway, that's it for this time. Next time I check in, I think it'll be Hustler again. And I do have an upcoming Vegas trip in which I'll play some private games, I believe. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this excerpt from Miami. And until next time, good luck at your local tables. Peace.